Yes.
Just from Noel at this stage, and I'll just put the resolution up on the screen for you.
Also, everybody notes the thing on the screen at the moment that the meeting is being recorded, and we'll get a lot of requests from journalists and others under the Official Information Act to hear exactly what is said at this meeting. Not.
So just apologies from Philip Buckthorpe.
Okay, Philip Buckthorpe is also noted in there. Is Philip the main man, or are you, Toby?
No, Philip's the main man. He heads our civil defence meeting here, so it's more appropriate that he's the main man.
Yeah. Okay, do I have a mover and a seconder to receive those?
Yes, Sally, TCDC.
Sally moves, seconded by someone there.
Otorohanga.
Oklahoma.
That'll do.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Sorry,
Aye.
Chair, what was the second mover of that resolution?
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Councillor.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just to let you know I'm here. Mark Bunting, Hamilton.
Oh, Hamilton City is here. That's
Jeez. Tell you what, you get off the mark promptly, don't you?
yeah. Right, the apologies are received. You all happy with the confirmation of the agenda? Nobody wants to delete anything or add anything? No, all right, so we confirm the agenda. We move on to the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. You've all read them and digested them, and there's nothing of any great consequence in there. Somebody that was here, happy to move if I go seconder.
Move it, Wade.
Who's my seconder?
Councillor Lee.
Councillor Lee, Thomas Lee, South Waikato. Seconds that they are true record of what happened. All those in favour, so please say aye. Contrary carried. We move on to the agenda item, which is on page 10 if you're following the agenda. And government reforms. Julian, you're going to tell us what the government is up to, please.
Well, I was going to get Daniel, Mr. Chair, Daniel Kruger to do that, but Daniel, for those of you probably seen in your email, Danielle left us, so I will, and she's gone over to Regional Council, but we'll forgive her because of all the work that all the service that she's provided us over the years. So I will cover this report off. It is down as for information only and to receive it, but I think it is worth some discussion at least. So the idea of this standing item is because of the number of changes being proposed across central government and local government, try to keep an understanding or an overview of those central government reforms, so we could, as a civil defence group, consider the potential impacts and be prepared to provide some submissions proactively. And bullet point number 4 identifies where you have done that as a civil defence group. So you have submitted, which is an attachment to on the exposure draft regarding the Natural and Built Environment Act. And there was some strong feedback, and thank you for the members who participated in that, because I know it was more than one meeting. Such was the conversation, and there was some feedback provided around the need for the CDEM Act to integrate with the role of CDEM in the management of natural hazards. So yep, there was an opportunity there. I think the one I want to talk about or highlight, there's two, and very much in your role as group members, but also as local authorities. The item 5, which is the future for local government review, they've released their interim report, and the feedback I've received is the report is written at a very high level and does not necessarily go into any detail that identifies a risk to emergency management at this stage. But the panel did trigger or offer opportunities for questions and feedback, and seem quite open to submissions. And one of the things that, because of the stuff that's going on, one of the things I think, because of that openness to receive feedback, I put down here that probably this 0.5 is a significant focus of our coordination going forward, and that's to ensure that that our local authority and our CDEM group feedback is either consistent, or that we identify where the members in the CDEM group are not entirely aligned, and that is likely to be a risk when we're opening, or the central government are encouraging feedback from local government, very much so, and the agencies and CDEM, and we could end up where a local authority submits something that's slightly different to the CDEM group, and that's not a bad thing, but at least I think if we focus in this area, we can make sure that we're at least not if we are at a difference of opinion, we understand why we've got a difference of opinion and we can talk to it and understand the implications. The other part is the national infrastructure strategy, and we do have this is very much in the NEMA space. We do have David Coetzee from NEMA on the meeting with us today. But the Government's Infrastructure Commission has released its 30-year or draft 30-year infrastructure strategy, and there have been a number of recommendations of relevance to the CDEM group, particularly around lifeline utility groups. And NEMA, who are leading in this space on behalf of the sector, have sought feedback from the lifeline utility groups, and there is support for the proposals in general. But some of the bits I want to flag to you is the move, or the potential move, from lifeline utility to critical infrastructure, including a more defined or a better definition of what critical infrastructure is within the Civil Defence Act. And then there would be a consistent level of assessment of that infrastructure to determine whether it's critical or not. You'll go back a few years and we did an assessment, a priority or a critical assessment of our infrastructure, and there was no, across the country, what we deemed as a priority area or critical infrastructure was not necessarily the same as in another area, another CDEM group area. So they're looking to add some consistency around that. And interestingly, adequately resource the National Emergency Management Agency and lead sector agencies to support the delivery of those new requirements. So NEMA are taking a very strong lead in this space. There is also a submission about the regular discussion or disclosure, I should say, about infrastructure preparedness. Again, we have, as local authorities, that's you at the moment for the three waters in particular. You know, you are lifeline utilities, and whilst on the whole there hasn't been a reluctance, I would suggest, from my experience, of local authorities to provide information on the preparedness of their infrastructure. Certainly some of the more private entities have been, because of commercial interest and other intellectual property, but this tends to or tries to address some of that. So that's probably the main points of that submission, Mr. Chair. Happy to try and answer any questions around it, but I think that the main thing for us, given that NEMA are leading in the lifeline utility space, when you combine that with the three waters conversation, that there could be some discussion around where the local authority voices in that infrastructure strategy. But the big one for us is definitely the review for a future of local government and making sure that any submissions across the group membership are either consistent or we understand where they're inconsistent.
Julian, the Lifelines, is NEMA going to come out with a or who should be included in the Lifelines group, and that's it, or do the individual regions have the ability to say in that region so should be included in there?
I don't know the specific answer to that, Mr. Chair. What I can say is that once they there's certainly scope for a defined list, if you want, because once we get the definition of what critical infrastructure is, a clearer definition, and probably more importantly, who the future leads are in that area. So if the Three Waters moves from local government to another private, not a private entity, but a new entity, then of course it would stipulate that that new entity would be the Lifeline utility representative. So I think there's potentially a lot of change coming, and there would be, whether it's a stipulated list or whether it's guidance of who should be there, I would expect that to come with the changes. I don't know if David Cutsey is able to, from Nima or Chloe, are able to answer that any further.
Thank you, Julian and Chair. Good afternoon. I think my answer would have been where Julian ended. It is not clear to me either whether it will actually be taken up in the regulations as such, but if not, then certainly it will be in the supporting guidance. So there will be some clarity around that, I expect.
David, what sort of time frame are we looking at now?
This is, I'll give you a more fulsome update about the wider regulatory framework review timelines under the NEMA update, but it's all rolled into the bowl, which is aimed at middle of next year.
Okay, we'll then part of the update later on. Anybody got any good questions of Julian and what he's covered on the update? No, everybody happy? All right, I will move that the information be received. Alan Goddard, you happy to second?
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Yep, thank you. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
The appointment of alternative group controller. Mark, are you going to take us through this one?
No, that will be me, Mr. Chair. I'll do that. Mark's kindly written it for me. I'll go through this one, and we do have, I'm hoping, yes, we do have the said person sat here in the committee today. So if you wanted to have a conversation about him, Mr. Chair, and you don't want him present, we'll have to ask him to excuse himself. But of course, if you wanted to grill him on any questions, he's here for your for those questions to be answered. That's Aaron Tregoeth. So the purpose of this report is to provide you as a joint committee an opportunity to appoint an alternative group controller and an alternative group recovery manager in one. I'll just remind us about the history of that in a moment. In accordance with the current group controller policy, it is there's a delegation provided to the statutory roles appointment advisory committee that allows them to recommend an appointment directly to joint committee for statutory roles, and they have done that. The statutory roles and appointment committee have recommended to joint committee that Aaron Tregoeth be appointed as alternate group controller and recovery manager, subject to his successful completion of the response and recovery leadership development course, which Aaron sits, I believe, in February. So this allows us to meet our requirements under the Act. Under the Act, you must, as a civil defence group, appoint a group controller, and then you must have at least one other person to carry out the duties and functions of a group controller in that group. In my absence, you've appointed me, but in my absence, you've got to appoint at least one other person. We do have two current alternates, but with the restructure or realignment of the GMO, we've got a new team leader in Aaron Tregoeth, and there will be a transition where the previous team leader, which is Andy Boubert, will transition out, and the plan is to transition the new team leader, subject to your appointment, into that new alternate group controller and recovery manager role. So in terms of in terms of why the group recovery manager, I just remind members that in May 2021, group controllers were also appointed as group recovery managers because of the issue that arose during COVID, where the national declaration was cancelled and put into a recovery notice or a transition notice, which automatically transferred the powers to the group recovery manager, but the group recovery manager was not still leading the event. So this provided some challenges that can be reasonably foreseen to happen again in the future. So this isn't creating an extra pool of recovery managers per se, it's providing a contingency for a situation where group controllers continue to need to lead a response where there's not necessarily a recovery that's required, but there are recovery powers put in place. We have followed the appointment process, that it's as part of his recruitment into this role. Aaron was not only interviewed once by the, if you want, the employer, he was also interviewed by the Statutory Roles Advisory and Appointment Committee, and hence he's come before us, come before you today. His background is 23 years in the New Zealand Defence Force. His latest appointment prior to coming to us was he was the captain in charge of the Force Health Protection. And Aaron is an experienced leader of people, an excellent communicator, and he's been deployed on several occasions, including to Iraq as the medical liaison officer in a multinational environment, to Vanuatu, to a volcanic eruption and a humanitarian emergency, and a range of other humanitarian emergencies either in New Zealand or the Southwest Pacific. He's a member of the International Emergency Management Association. He holds a Bachelor of Health Science, and he's just completed his emergency management postgrad diploma with the University of, or Massey University. So the decisions for you today, Mr. Chair, as the Joint Committee, is whether or not to appoint Aaron as alternate group controller, alternate group recovery manager, subject to him passing part 1 of that response course, leadership course, in February.
Okay, thank you, Julian. Aaron, you're on. You're attending the meeting?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. In which case, in 2 minutes, tell me why you are the right person to be assistant to Julian and to be there for any event that happens. If he's happened to be in Morrinsville and he's down the pub and you had to take over and you've got a background in defence, tell us why you're the ideal man for it.
Well, I have a background in emergency management. I've quite a bit of experience overseas working with a range of different nationalities and people. I get on well with people. I'm a people person, and I enjoy doing what's right for the community. I have had I've been put in a range of extremely stressful situations in Iraq and in Ambai with the volcanic eruptions, and have had to make decisions in a environment where not all the information is readily available. I'm confident in making decisions and making the hard decisions, but I'm also able to work with a range of people and collaborate effectively to get to a good end result for the community. That's my probably minute spiel. I don't like to mince words too much. I just like to get it out there.
Okay, thank you for that. And you shifted up here for this job, I understand.
Yes, I did. I'm moving into Cambridge on the 17th of December.
Yeah. Has any of the Joint Committee members got any questions you'd like to take at this stage? As I say, Aaron's been through a rigorous process of getting this far, and the recommendation is coming that we appoint him. So has anybody got any questions? There being none, I'm happy to move the appointment. Do I have a seconder, please? Topo is happy to move. Get that right, mate?
No, but we can work on that, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Okay, all those in favour, please say aye.
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 In which case, Aaron, welcome aboard and best of luck with your shift into Cambridge early next month. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you for that.
That choice of areas to live does create some doubt over his decision-making ability, I have to say. There's nothing wrong with Morrinsville and Matamata-Piarco. Why, Pa?
Ex-military, but not on the artillery. You know, that's a back.
Thanks for that, Julian.
Yeah, and through the chair, I think it's sensible that the group controller and alternates sort of have their own bubbles apart, because you never know.
Yes. Okay. We move on, and the next one is health and safety update.
Yeah, that's me again, Mr. Chair. So this is for information, but you will see I'm actually asking for a bit of a conversation, or for you to consider the need to, or how you wish to make any urgent decisions in relation to this, should they be required. And I suspect they will in this report, but I'll come to that. So the purpose of this report is to provide the Joint Committee with information on emerging issues around health and safety for the CDEM group. In short, the KEG have agreed that there is a requirement, or we would benefit from a group-wide position or agreement on managing the risk of COVID for staff working in a CDEM response and recovery. We also, this aligns with probably takes our current deployment policy that has previously been signed off. It takes it to another level, in essence, where we have to consider the risks and controls of where people are being deployed, not only within the Waikato area, but in other parts of New Zealand. And the circumstances are, if I go back to March this year, we had the legal opinion where we talked about the complexity of the CDEM Act, Local Government Act, in relation to the Health and Safety Act, and the complexity for CDEM groups, particularly ours being such a large group. The Joint Committee, or the CDEM group, is not a PCBU, but the councils that make up the group are. So because we're so big, that's the bit that creates the complexity. The legal advice was that CDEM group members are required to jointly understand their critical risks and collaborate and plan with the relevant organisations. And where we currently are with COVID is we know that we're moving away from an elimination strategy to a protection strategy, which will see COVID managed in the community. A key aspect of that move and that protection strategy relates to attaining high levels of vaccination amongst the population, with many roles and workplaces being mandated, but particularly those in a customer-facing workforce, but not yet local authorities or civil defence. The latest tranche, I think, was defence and police, but we as councils or civil defence have not been mandated for that. So irrespective of the mandated element of our work, whether it's CDEM or local authority, our experience in the Waikato in the COVID response has identified an absolute expectation by iwi and other community leaders that any personnel being deployed within the communities to support them will be double vaccinated. They don't want, some of our community leaders don't want a bar of staff who are not double vaccinated going out and helping them. The expectation is that we will protect them. Now, because of the nature of how we're structured, and I always like my analogies, if you use the group office and the professional or full-time emergency managers for CDEM, we are the brains and the nervous system of emergency management. The arms and the legs here, the actual work is done. A lot of the work is done by local authority staff and welfare agencies and others. We could not do emergency management without those roles, without our librarians, without our rates people, without our animal control people, who all take on, and etc., who all take on other responsibilities in a civil defence response. And if we look at the current WorkSafe risk assessment process that each council's going through, the council will be reviewing those roles against their full-time job descriptions in most cases. Not every council, some councils do have more detailed job descriptions that include the specifics of the CDEM role, but on the whole, there will be a lot of councils already undertaking individual pieces of work around mandated vaccination policies or whatever a vaccination policy might look like. But they're looking at it through the lens predominant or potentially looking at it through the lens of their business as usual job description. But many of these people, as I've said, will be expected to perform public facing roles in an emergency, even if they're back office roles during business as usual. So I know that there are some councils who are in the work that's been undertaken at the moment. There are some councils that are taking a very conservative and cautious approach, and there are some who are not so. And I'm not saying I'm not saying they're liberal. I'm just saying they're not as conservative or cautious. So we're potentially going to have different policies, especially in the lack of a mandate, different policies by 11 different councils in the region. So this is where at its meeting, KEG discussed the need for a single position for CDEM staff who are going to work in a response or a recovery. The group office was asked to undertake some work to look at options for what our options might look like in relation to this vaccine and protection space. And we are reporting back on those findings. That workshop was done last week. The report is being written as we speak, and that will be reported to KEG and discussed at an extraordinary KEG meeting this Friday, where those considerations may result in policy implications for the CDEM group, which may then require an urgent policy decision by joint committee. And that's going to be outside of your normal meeting cycle. So other than receiving the information, and quite happy to take questions, but there's also an opportunity for the CDEM group or you as a group to consider how you want to deal with any urgent policy decision outside, whether it is to convene an extraordinary meeting of the full joint committee, or whether or not the joint committee wants to delegate its authority to a subcommittee. And if I go back to the terms of reference of a joint committee, you do have the power to delegate your functions to any of your members. So that's my report, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. I'll take it in two parts. One, you're saying that at your meeting with KEG on Friday, there may be a policy requirement that gets signed off by the joint committee. That's the initial stage, and there should be something going on. We have in the past accepted a subcommittee to sign off on these things, and the normal way that we have done it is there was say three, the chair, the deputy chair, and one other member appointed to the subcommittee, and they were authorised to make decisions. However, the issue that was being debated would be emailed to each individual member so that they were aware of what was there, and if there were any issues for or against, they would contact any members of the subcommittee and express those, and if nothing was heard, it was left up to the subcommittee to do it. So is anybody disagreeing with that as a philosophy of going forward? There being none, I suggest that a minimum of three, and it would be myself as chair, would be Anna Parker as deputy chair, and give me another nomination. Very onerous job.
I'm happy to participate, TCDC.
TCDC, Sally. Thank you for that. Somebody like, and is anybody else desperate to come on? Are you happy to move that those three named people be the subcommittee?
I'll move. Alan, go ahead.
Got from Waitomo moves that those named people be the subcommittee.
I'm happy to second Hamilton.
Hamilton City.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 That deals with the receipt of the information, the appointment of. Can I just, Langley, can I go to you and just ask you, what is the possibilities of too wide a range of health and safety issues from all our member councils? You're in charge of all the chief executives. Is it likely very difficult, minorly difficult, or what?
We're hoping that, and the intent of KEG is that the GMO put together some, I guess, sort of pro forma policies that we will all collectively adopt. When it comes to health and safety and the decisions of the PCBU, those are decisions that the chief executive will make. And we're just hoping, that the purpose of doing this collectively is, and KEG, the KEG members sit around there with the authority of the CEOs. So we hope we will just adopt a similar policy. I will note that a lot of the good guidance that we'll be using as a sector is still being written. The government proposes to release, I think, its framework around about, I think it's about the 15th of December, mid-December. So any decision we make now, it may have to be tweaked at that time. But I would expect reasonable alignment, but I do observe and note that a number of councils are consulting on mandatory vaccination for all staff at this time, but that's not something which is consistently across the Waikato. I would imagine that a risk assessment for particularly our welfare staff, those staff used in providing welfare needs, will be towards that direction. The other, I guess, quite significant issue for us is the health order and the requirement to isolate staff. And so that's most probably going to have as big a, if not a more major influence on how we run events. If we have someone who contracts COVID and is a close contact to a number of a team, say in the GEC, well then all of those teams have to stand down. And for roles where you can't work remotely, that particularly poses quite a risk to us. So you'll see us over the next 12 months, I think, reverting to very small bubbles of workers, a lot of remote working, and that sort of thing to manage that risk. But I guess to answer your question, Hugh, I've got a reasonable expectation that we will be reasonably consistent.
Okay, is there any indication that government may legislate for the whole of the local government sector?
Not seeing that at this stage. It's more likely to be some roles, but no, unless David is able to, with his NEMA view, to have a bit of inside knowledge. But I haven't seen anything that would indicate that local government will be part of a mandated, a central decision on mandated vaccination.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. Any members want to make any questions or comments?
If I can just, I know I'm not a member, Mr. Chair, but if I could just highlight some of the thinking that's going on as well from a really practical level. So if I flick to, and it might signal the answer to your question around central government mandating the emergency management system. If I flick to NEMA, at this moment in time, I'm going down to Wellington this week, down to NEMA, and part of their protocols for accepting emergency managers down there for core business as usual meetings is I will be required to undertake a rapid antigen test on my day one. So will everybody else, even though we are double vaccinated, and sign declarations every day I turn up. In terms of the NCMC, the National Crisis Management Centre, then there will, as a condition of entry, because of the different agencies who are likely to work in that space and the difficulty of getting a consistent approach, the consistent approach would appear to be, as a condition of entry, somebody needs to be double vaxxed, particularly at an orange and a red traffic light. And it will be based on the traffic light system. Of course, you can say to somebody, you don't need to be double vaxxed to come into our premises and work in an EOC at green, but the reality is you're then trying to have two workforces, one that can go in during green and then one that can go in during orange and red, and it becomes it's difficult enough maintaining an emergency management cadre in the background, let alone trying to have one that can operate with double vax and one that doesn't need to be double vaxxed. So it really is a complex space at the moment.
Okay. Look forward to what's coming up on Friday. Thank you for that. Moving on. National Emergency Management. David, now can you give us your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, amidst all the many things going on, I think I'll just stick to an update on the regulatory framework review today, because that is certainly the most pressing and probably most important business going on at the moment. So I was fortunate to attend your meeting in August, where I've given you a higher level update on the regulatory framework review, which of course is brings together three projects. That's about the Emergency Management Bill, the National Civil Defence Emergency Management Plan and Guide, and thirdly, the roadmap for the National Disaster Resilience Strategy. So therefore, we refer to the trifecta program reflecting these three elements. Most importantly, in terms of the bill, the latest development is on the 15th of November. Cabinet agreed to a number of proposals, including a replacement of the current CDEM Act with a new Emergency Management Act. Previously, the thinking was just an update, but that thinking has changed towards a replacement, a new act, because of the extent of the changes envisaged. Now, there were also other proposals included in the cabinet paper that were approved. These will be announced by the minister soon, when the cabinet paper is proactively released. So we were asked to just hold back to give us space to do those announcements. So that will come out soon. In the meantime, we are consulting with our stakeholders across the system to progress the bill towards the new act. So over the next 2 months, we will be engaging with a range of stakeholders in a targeted way. That will include joint committees, KEGs, and the CDM group officials. And the consultation will largely be about the 5 main outstanding parts regarding the Act. Roles and responsibilities in the first instance. Secondly, the matter of iwi and Maori representation at all levels of emergency management. The question of lead and support agencies, clarifying that. Also, outside of declared emergencies, as I think we all experience, there are some ambiguities and uncertainties around that always. The matter that Julian has mentioned about critical infrastructure, or as we currently know it, lifeline utilities. And lastly, providing protections for disproportionately impacted people. That is something that's not represented in the current legislation. So this engagement that we will do over the next 2 months will feed into the final policy advice that will go to the minister early next year, so that it can be included in the bill. And also, of course, that will start informing our view on the Civil Defence Emergency Management Plan, for which we obviously have a bit of more time throughout next year. So in building on our current engagement with CDM group managers on this matter, and there's another 2-hour workshop scheduled for the 6th of December. Following these, we will circulate the draft policy proposals to you early in January for feedback. And then in the week of January the 17th, we will host multiple options for online sessions to introduce the proposals, answer questions, and receive feedback. Because of the timelines that the Minister is putting on introducing the bill, the comments to these proposals will be due in mid-February. We do appreciate that this is a challenging time and especially this short time frame amidst multiple central government reforms underway. Therefore, in advance, we'd like to thank you for your participation in this engagement, as it is important that these policy proposals are obviously informed by your voices. There will, of course, then be opportunity for further engagement with regards to the plan throughout 2022. Now, we've recently published some information on our website as well that gives some more background about what I was talking about, so that is available there if you want to have a look at it. Or you can email myself with any questions, and I will pass it on to our policy people for an appropriate reply. That's as far as I want to go, Chair. Thank you for listening. Happy to answer any questions.
David, thank you. Shaker, you have a question?
Your Worship, through the chair, sorry, Your Worship. David, I'm just we have an emergency management committee as a standing committee for the Taupo district. And I'm just a bit concerned about these timelines and being able to have our emergency management committee come together to make an informed response to the draft. I mean, as you all know, in public sector, December and January are somewhat trying months on getting the team together. So is there any leeway at all with the Minister in regards to this consultation process? Because it seems very short, and also, I mean, this is a huge part of a whole new act. It's a big part. I just wondered if there was some leeway around that. It's an important piece of legislation.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yes, and I think this is a consistent message that we hear from the CDM groups about this, the limited time frame for consultation. So we are feeding this back to the Minister, and so I won't say that this is final, but that's where we stand at the moment, and just have to be honest with you in that regard. So rest assured, we are giving this feedback to the Minister, and I guess we'll have to see whether there's any appetite for an extension there.
Thank you, David.
Any other questions? Not heaps. So David, we're still looking at regional boundaries. We're not looking at massive changes like the Three Waters areas. Are still looking at regional, but to include others within the new structure.
That's correct, Chair. We do not foresee any changes there in terms of that core foundations that our current system is based on.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. That the report be received. Toby, you happy to move? Thank you. Thomas, you're seconding? All in favour?
Seconding, yes.
Contrary, thank you. The motion is carried. And David, thank you for your report and what you've done. The group work plan, Julian.
Mr. Chair. So I'm going to give the highlights because it is for information only. I'll give an overview of where we are, which will be a very succinct one, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions relating to the detail but I don't intend to go through the detail unless you specifically ask me to. But it's fair to say that progress in delivering the CDEM work plan has been impacted, and not just by vacancies and the recent realignment, but the significant impacts probably been since March 2020, if probably not a little bit earlier than that, with Southland floods and Whakaari White Island. So it's been nearly 2 years of interruption and impact from COVID, and if not all group members at some point during the last 2 years have been significantly impacted by these emergencies, which has taken, as you know, we don't have two workforces, we have one, and that switch or that pivot towards response, which it has been for 2 years, and then the admin and the tidy up behind after the response, such as spending a significant amount of time getting our bids through for the money that was expended while everybody else went back to work. That has impacted our work program. We are undertaking, and we're in the process and a significant way through an in-depth analysis of the impacts on the group plan, and we do propose that in the first meeting of the 2022 cycle, we will provide you an analysis of what can be completed, what can't be completed with the current resource, and what options we have for you to consider to either meet what we can, or meet everything, meet more than what we can, but with additional resource, or meet everything, and what the additional resource would look like, or temporary resource would look like to achieve what you want to achieve. So that will come in the February Joint Committee meeting. It's not all, I know all the colours have changed in terms of, I say not all of them, but and you'll see that the status colours in the table have changed quite a few from green to amber. That's just a reflection of we're off plan. We're off track, but we do have plans in place to get them back. But it's whether we can get them back on track in the right time frame is the question that we need to go through in the new year. It's not all doom and gloom either. There are a number of pieces of work around that are still ongoing, that have been enhanced or tested by COVID, such as the Pauarahi and the iwi Māori framework in EOCs has been tested. It's identified new challenges, but nothing that we weren't expecting. And it says has improved our communication and our relationships with the iwi across the region. The MS Teams and the EMI, the central government EMI platform that replaced EMIS, that has been used and used to good effect. And again, that has enhanced us as a region. We've been able to adapt that and work remotely. And whilst there were some challenges that you would expect when you're implementing something new for the first time, on the whole, it's been a positive experience. So I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has anything on the work plan, but the headline is no surprises, it's off track, and it's off track for legitimate reasons. And there is nothing that I'm actually sticking my hand up at the moment and saying until you get to my next report, but there's nothing in this work plan that I'm saying I really need some help here. I just need some direction, and that direction will come with some options to you at the next meeting.
So at the next meeting, you're going to tell us that the group plan has been put on hold for some considerable time, and the Joint Committee can either accept that it will stay on hold, or some temporary additional staff would be required to bring it up to date.
That's the long and short of it, Mr. Chair, yes.
So what's going to happen when there's a massive weather event that hits the Coromandel over Christmas this year, and all hell breaks loose up there, and you've got COVID going on in there? How are you going to get through that?
None of the work program stuff. If the operational stuff in the work program, I would say is probably a lot of it's been enhanced. because of the responses. It's the wider stuff outside of the response. So the work program, the only element of that I think threatens our ability to stand up a response, and I'll touch on that in the next report, but is probably the training and the churn of staff. So we've had to put off a lot of training, which is part of our group plan work program, so because of the alert levels. And there, of course, there are staff who have left council and churned through, and we're not training new ones. So that's always going to be a challenge for us, because of that training gap. But other than that, I think we're well in terms of, are we well placed? I'll let you decide on the next report, Mr. Chair, without jumping across to that. But it's not related to the work program. It is related to other issues, our threat, not the work program.
Understand. So you're saying that the various items in the work plan that's gone from green to amber is unlikely to go to red?
No, it won't go to red. Not at this stage. Dependent on how long we are in COVID, how long we are in a COVID monitoring and transition period, supporting the regional leadership group to take over the locally led, regionally coordinated approach rather than the national one. If it goes on for significant periods of time, then yes, I think there will be elements of the group work plan that will never get back on track. But I'm hoping that the options we provide in February will prevent them going to red.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions of Julian on the group plan? There being none, move the receipt. Lou Brown, you happy to move?
Chair.
Thank you, Lou. Thomas, seconding?
Second, yes.
Please say aye. Thank you.
Aye.
The report is received. Julian, back to you again to tell us more about COVID response.
Yep. Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm just, where have we gone? I think it's the, have I missed an item? Sorry, my computer's freezing. That's why it's freezing.
7 8 8 9 5 1 5 5.
Dear me. Oh, I tell you what, that's karma, Mr. Chair, for all the times I've phoned somebody when they're on a meeting. My apologies. I was wondering why my computer wasn't.
We will forgive you.
That's okay. There you go, karma. Okay, so I'm going to provide you an update on the COVID resurgence activities that are, just to remind everybody that these are led by central government, which is the Health and Social Services, so Ministry of Health and MSD in essence, supported by the Waikato CDM group. And there are some risks I want to highlight to you today. Some of them are the work program going forward, and this is where, Mr. Chair, you talked about would they go to red? Well, yes, without some intervention, there will be some that go to red, and I'll cover that. So irrespective of the fact that this is a health and social services led event, we as the CDM group, and me as my role in particular, continue to provide the regional leadership group with support. We continue to support that group and participate on that group, and there are a number of local authority chief executives also on that group, and we're there to assist in the planning and the delivery of the current COVID response. There are plans to transition, and I need to separate out CDM groups and local authorities here. I need to be clear that I'm not talking about local government when I talk about CDM groups here, but there are plans to transition CDM groups out of the COVID environment in the short to medium term. In the meantime, we still have a role in the national plan. So this is the Q4 2021 national plan. We have a specific role to be able to maintain or stand up and maintain an effective coordination structure if required. and as well as the recent direction we've been given by the chief executive of NEMA is that we, like it or not, we have a lead. Sorry, we have a role, not a lead role. We have a role in supporting RLGs in coordination and planning. But we've got to do so. The direction we've been given, or the advice we're given, is we've got to do so in a way that doesn't see us becoming decisively engaged, because we've got to be able to do our own response or concurrent event if we get that storm that you've talked about in Thames Coromandel over the summer period. So the CDEM Act places a real, it places a legal obligation on you as a group to effectively respond and manage to the effects of CDEM-led emergencies in our area. And I'm highlighting that our sustained exposure to COVID does create a risk in our ability to meet this obligation, and this is the response obligation, not the business as usual. We talked about the work plan and the impact earlier, but this is very much now on that response obligation in the immediate short term, and that's because, for example, we operate a response framework that relies on economies of scale, where we share our resources across the group. A lot of these resources are not full-time emergency managers. We've talked about that. These are members of council staff and who are busy in other areas of work also related to central government reform, whether it's the RMA or the Future for Local Government or Three Waters, for example, or the increase in building inspections and compliance checks that are required. So we're drawing on resources that are already stretched and busy, and there is, whilst we've not been leading this event, a lot of our full-time emergency managers we've not been running the race, but we've been jogging on the spot, and that expends energy. And people, the system there is fatigue in the system, but I have confidence that we would be able to stand up an event. No doubt, we've got good people, but it's whether it's sustainment. If it was a long event, a big event, how long could we sustain that response? So the longer that we remain engaged is, I suppose, what I'm saying. The longer we remain engaged in the COVID space, the more fatigue and the more impact it has on the goodwill of our councils to provide staff into that response framework and the availability of staff generally. And what also can't be overlooked is a lot of the and this is where some of the more complex issues that are probably beyond my immediate control come into play, is even if we are to extract or transition CDEM out sooner than what I'm anticipating, which would probably be about March next year, even if we were to extract CDEM out, and that's after the peak risk period, by the way. So CDEM are going to be engaged in that coordination and that planning space to support RLGs during the biggest risk period after the borders have opened and people are coming onto Thames Coromandel, Carfia, Raglan and Taupo in those holiday hotspots in the Waikato. So when we transition out, a lot of what we don't know is the impact on a lot of our conventional partners, such as what is going to be the role for local government in an ongoing COVID protection framework, and certainly the wraparound support for people self-isolating at home. What we do know is a lot of our conventional partners for welfare, whether they are iwi or non-government organisations or other food banks and community groups, they're the same people who are being pulled into a COVID response, supporting, whether it's being commissioned or via voluntary services, are being commissioned by MSD and by public health to provide those wraparound services. So if we get a concurrent event, there is a big risk that under the new COVID protection framework that's due to come out, and we haven't seen it yet, the finite detail, a lot of the agencies we would ordinarily rely on those. So I refer back to my analogy earlier. We will have some fatigued, but able, capable and ready emergency managers and group emergency management office staff, full-time staff, but those arms and legs that we rely on from our volunteers and our councils, our welfare agencies, their availability is questionable at this moment in time because of the ongoing need for wraparound welfare support in a COVID environment for probably a couple of years to come. So we're waiting on the detail to be released for the COVID protection framework. What I can tell you is, I think it's common. It's been announced by the minister, so it is not a secret that there are some agencies, central government agencies, who are going to get extra resource, whether that's human resource or financial resource or both, to meet their ends to commission more NGOs, for example, in the health space and the welfare space. But what we don't know is the impact on local government, and what we don't know is how that's going to affect our ability to stand up a response. So it could be that we have to come back to this committee, and once we know what the COVID protection framework looks like, and say we don't have enough resource based on COVID and concurrent event to stand up a full or sustain a long-term response or a medium-term response, and we may be looking for additional resource, temporary, to see us through a period of time when we can have more people available to us in an emergency response setting. And it's the same conversation as last time. This is probably less likely, this space, in terms of asking for a decision, because I think this will probably run through to the next cycle naturally. But in the event that the COVID protection framework, when it's released, very clearly shows a risk to the ability for us to stand up and manage a response in our area, I might have to come back to you as a group and ask about resourcing. So that's my report, Mr. Chair.
Oh, what a wonderful report. Anna, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Julian. I don't know, I'm not quite sure how you can assist with this. I'm really concerned about the resourcing. I mean, the work plan is one thing. It's been a little bit up and down over the years, even before COVID, with, you know, recruitment and change in group controllers and whatnot in the first place. And then you look at today's community case figures and hospital figures and contract tracing figures, and only 67% of those who are community cases or are isolating have had contact from the contract tracing team. So the resourcing, even from the grassroots of what they're trying to achieve, need to be pushed up big time. Is there anything at the regional leadership group level regarding their actual baseline work around contract tracing and getting things more up into the 90% where they want vaccinations as opposed to the 60s?
Look, I at the regional leadership group, we have just run a was it not last week, the week before, following the previous Friday, we ran a workshop where we used some modelling, where those agencies came together, and we ran some modelling to say this is where it's going to peak, which was 640 cases per week in the Waikato as of the 29th of December, and for every positive case there was 2.5 ratio of people requiring to self-isolate, and so on and so forth. And it created a demand profile, although it was a very basic one. And part of that workshop's objectives, Councillor Park, was for those agencies to go away and consider their resourcing to meet those needs. And what we're seeing at the moment is health, and this is no different to what we saw in Auckland, where health or public health are, I don't want to use the word struggling, because that would but they're not achieving what they probably would want to achieve in terms of that standard of wraparound service and case management. The risk for, and I say this is not on the agenda item, and I'm at risk of having my knees chopped off here, but one of the risks I would say in that contact tracing space is not contact tracing, the case management and the welfare wraparound service, is if we're not meeting those, which you're signalling nationally we're not, then Auckland Emergency Management were engaged or asked to be engaged, and Auckland Council were asked to be engaged in the space of helping public health. My advice to this civil defence group will be, if we are asked to support such a policy, is that I would not support, I would not recommend putting local authority staff or CDEM staff into those medical call centres in essence, because we saw on the first COVID response, when some of those really difficult welfare calls were coming into CDEM Direct, it did have an effect on the mental well-being, if you want, or the well-being of some of the staff taking those calls who are not trained to take those calls and not trained in that space. So there are some, and you're also seeing from some of the referrals to the coroner's court up in Auckland of people who are unfortunately passing away whilst being in self-isolation. I don't know the circumstances behind those, but there is clearly some legal and reputational risk for the agencies who are involved in those calls and may not be being able to make those calls. So in terms of, are we having the discussions at regional leadership group around how they're going to meet that demand? Not yet. The agencies are certainly being funded and creating their own directorates. Health is creating a COVID directorate because of the extra funding that they're getting. And I don't know if that includes, however, that case management staffing. That would be for those agencies, but that's not visible to us at RLG yet. But the purpose of the meeting 2 Fridays ago was to draw at those issues out and for any gaps to be brought to the regional leadership group for consideration. But I'm flagging here, I suppose, whether it's the appropriate forum or not, if it came back to the table at regional leadership group to say, can local authorities provide staff for that case management? As a group manager, my recommendation would be no, but ultimately I will be told what to do, and I appreciate that. But for the reasons I've outlined, mine would be no, that's a professional staff counsellor or call taker in that space that probably gets some support afterwards.
And through the chair, I wasn't at all advocating that local government or CDEM staff be involved in that at all, but I just think that they need to bolster stuff at that response level and assist those people. And you're right, we need to be kept totally out of that. But I just wonder what the urgency is, because it's the contact tracing stats are dropping, even though the numbers are rising, I suppose. So it's a ratio thing. But I'm concerned that the central government stuff isn't good enough yet, let alone the arms and the legs of the body of work, as you were talking about before.
And in fairness to some of the, to some of the agencies around the RLG, the regional leadership group, we are still waiting for the detail of the roles and responsibilities under the COVID protection framework. My understanding is the agencies have been told that they've got money, some of those agencies that they have got funding, and there is a budget being provided to MSD and health. But I think the devil will be in the detail of the roles and responsibilities in the COVID protection framework, which is due any time now, I believe.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Julian. And it's also acknowledging that for a response and for welfare services, we rely very much on the territorial authority members of the Joint Committee. What you're also telling me is that with turnover in staff, we are getting, or if we had to call on the local authorities, we would struggle to get enough trained staff at the moment. Is that correct?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as to say we would struggle, Mr. Chair. I would say that we would be able to stand up a response for initially. There's no doubt about it. But if it was a longer response, if it was a significant event that is where my concern lies, and particularly over the Christmas period, because people are tired. People are looking for breaks. There are agencies, not just local authorities, there are agencies directing their staff to take leave over Christmas and go down to skeleton staffing, for example. I know that Waikato Regional Council, as an example, has just extended it or put some guidance out that we should be extending our Christmas leave period so people can get a longer break because of the year that we've had. But of course, for civil defence, for us as a civil defence group, the risk profile is going up, and we go back to that arms and legs, and we will rely on who's available. But operationally, we will deal with that before Christmas. Is coming up at the KEG meeting on Friday, the extraordinary KEG meeting, to deal with making sure we've got sufficient trained staff to stand up over Christmas should the need arise.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions from any of the members today? Give me a wave, give me a flag or anything if you want to ask a question. There being nothing coming up at me, the resolution is that the reports be received. What are you telling me here? The joint committee consider how they wish to make urgent decisions. We've dealt with that, haven't we?
Yeah, well, I think you did that on the earlier one, sir, in relation to the policy, if it's the same, but this is a separate resolution. This is in the event that the COVID protection framework throws us some curveballs, that it clearly shows that we cannot resource what we're asked to resource over the peak period. With the staff that we've got, we will need to ask for additional staff specifically for COVID response. And how do you want that to be approached? Is that as a full, because that will be financial conversation. So is that as a full meeting, or is that as a delegated as previously under the health and safety report?
I'd be happy that if we dealt with as the subcommittee. I think that, and again, keep everybody informed, tell you what we're looking at, so that you've all got it there. It becomes difficult, especially with the holiday season coming up, to actually get in contact with members and having quorums and all these sort of things. So if members are happy with that, again, I would recommend that as the way forward. Lou Brown's nodding his head. So on that basis, I'm happy to move the resolution.
You move that, you are.
Thank you, Russell Smith. Are you happy to second? Good military man. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Thank you. We move on to the last one, which is the KEG. Langley, give us an update on what's happening in the KEG, please.
Yes, so KEG, I guess, saw a lot of the reports that have come through to here, and we provided our feedback and gave Julian some direction. You can have a look, you see some of the notes that we're having a bit of a review and thinking about how some of the advisory groups are structured and work. So those advisory groups, there's a number, such as Caldera Advisory Group, who provide advice to, in terms of the Caldera advice to us and the Bay of Plenty Civil Defence Group on around the Caldera risk. So we're sort of tightening up on how those groups work. And of course, we had some discussions around the health and safety issues around COVID and COVID resurgence. And we've set up a meeting for this Friday. So after the announcements today, we will be in a better position to know what the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months is going to be like, and whether or not one of the things that we're really seeking for some good guidance is around what our role's going to be on an ongoing basis. So Councillor Park just raised the issue around the contact tracing. Something I saw that came out of government this morning actually was that they are looking at standing up more staff, training them over the next 4 weeks so that they're targeting that they'll be able to manage 1,000 cases a day for contact tracing. But so it is quite difficult at times to get that sort of information out of government. But so that there's work happening there. We really have been pushing and seeking for clarity, and we're doing that through the regional leadership group in terms of feedback and providing around what is local government's role going forward. If we need to support our communities, we'll do that. We just need to have some time because we don't have, as Julian's indicated, we don't have the staff that we can stand up for prolonged periods, and we're talking months and months. And so we'd be looking at having to resource. I think with appropriate planning and some reasonable indication in terms of what we're going to be managing over the next 6 months, that existing providers will be able to hopefully stand up and provide those some of that response work. And I think our role, our expertise is around logistics and coordination and intelligence, etc. And we're hoping that if need be, that we can put some of that resource available to the RLG. And I understand, Julian, that there is some thoughts around the RLG being supported by an executive, which will definitely take a lot of the pressure off our team, and whether or not what our involvement in that might be going forward is something that's being worked through at the moment. Happy to take any questions on.
You can probably answer what the Minister said when we talked around that conversation, that she doesn't want Civil Defence to take a lead role but wants us to lean in, and you can probably let us know what the hell that means sometime.
Yeah, we got some confusing messages, I must admit, from that meeting. Where at one point, my notes indicate that we were told that the Civil Defence is going to be doing the grunt work. And to me, that's hard slog and labour intensive. But then we also got some commentary that we are going to be pulled back, and as Julian's indicated today, we're going to be have a very minor role so that we can deal with those events that the normal events that we'd normally stand up to, the earthquake on the Kiribati fault, the Lake Taupo doing what it wants to do, and generally I think we're going to get a cyclone down the Coromandel sort of thing. So it was a bit confusing. I think we're getting better clarity, even though it's a little bit grey, that we're not going to have a major role. And what I'm seeing through the regional leadership group is that we're slowly identifying what the workload's going to be over the next 12 months. And I think the workshop that Julian coordinated helped in that. I think, in fact, there's no mayors here that attended the meeting last week on Friday. The District Health Board presented to the Mural Forum, and they are currently working with Waikato University. They're doing a whole lot of modelling, which we hope to get some results from towards the latter part of this week, or I guess next week. And I think that'll give us a lot more clarity around what the situation will entail, and then we can allocate the resources through the existing providers, etc. And look where we have to step it up. I would make a comment that the way that the COVID response is being handled now and the work that's happening on the ground is working really well. We're seeing a lot of, particularly our iwi providers doing some really great work around welfare support, vaccination support, etc. And so they definitely have the skill set to do that work. It's just that we may have to, or somehow we're going to have to build perhaps the capacity if it ramps up.
Okay, thank you. Questions from any members? If you've got a question, now's your time. All confident, all happy. Okay, therefore I look for a mover and seconder for the motion. Sally, you happy to move?
Yes.
Thank you. Alan Goddard, you another photo that I see on my screen at the moment. You happy to second?
Yes.
Thank you. All those in favour that the report be received, say aye. Give me a thumbs up.
Aye.
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 Motion is carried. That concludes our meeting. So therefore, can I thank all the members for being present? Mike Bunting, good to have you here on board.
A total pleasure.
Nice to have you here. And to everybody else that's attended today, thank you for your attendance. Toby, good to see you still there. Nicholas, thank you for your help with the administration of that. Can I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and hope that we don't have to get together for any emergencies that are coming down the track. So with
Thank
that,
you.
attendance, I declare the meeting closed.
Merry Christmas all.
Thank you.